All right. Well, thank you for staying so late. I know we've had a long day with some amazing lectures and some crazy chicken. And I'll try to make it short as I can. Um, I was asked to talk about sustainability in a way that architecture can model nature. Um, this subject suits fantastically to Fernando, much less to other people. And we're trying to, instead of answering the question, like I was very tempted to do, I tried to actually address it, and I had some issues with it. I never like to talk about sustainability because I think it often hides a very bad architectural agenda. You know, it's that's why I call it architecture's hump. I don't know how we say in Spanish hump, like the camel. I think you okay. It feels like now every building is carried like this. You know, it's if Vitruvius were still here, he would say firmitas, comoditas, venustas, and something like greenitas, right? It's like you can't do a building if you don't sprinkle it with some sort of sustainable agenda. And the worst part of it is that it often takes us in the two very opposite directions. There are, in my sense, two very dangerous directions in architecture. On the one hand, you have a universalism that comes with technology because we can do it the same way everywhere. We can do solar panels and we can do wind things and we can do all of these very techy things that make our building zero imprint, zero emission, zero everything. Um, there's a notion that it's universally needed in the same way, that sustainability is the same everywhere, and that it's a needed element in every architectural project. And it becomes its own set of values. You start to rate building because of that. I mean, and you have charts, you have standards, HQ in France, leads, and you get medals, gold, silver, bronze. And there's a whole set of values attached to this, which are very problematic because now architecture is valued in terms of its performance. And I have to say, this whole issue of performing architecture is a little bit scary to me. I'm old-fashioned that way. The other set, which is almost opposite to this kind of high-techy, sustainable trend, is a notion that people start to rediscover traditional ways of building. You know, we go back in south of Morocco and we look at people building old building in mud and we're like, oh, it's beautiful. And then we say, well, why don't they use it anymore? You know, they're already sustainable. Why do they use concrete and bricks and all these horrible things we don't know? Well, that's a problem to me because there's a very heavily colonial look to indigenous architecture in passive mode. So on one hand, you have universal technological trend. On the other hand, you have a post-colonial look at indigenous architecture. And in the middle, there's us. And that's what I'm going to be trying to talk about. I'm joking a little bit because I know that people don't mean badly when they do these things. But I do think it takes away from what architecture should be. And I think the reason why sustainability became such a strong element at the heart of architecture, it's because we're guilty. We feel guilty. There's a guilt trip about this sustainability. We all feel like we're ruining the planet. And this whole sustainability makes us feel good about ourselves. It just doesn't work. We're just ruining it in a different way. And one of the first things that image that I always try, yeah, well, I'll talk about resistance later on. One of the first things that I struck me is 20 years ago. It's a building designed in 1953 by Atbat Afrique in Casablanca. This building was, and I showed it to Fernando in Venice, this building was a model of adapted modern architecture in the 50s. After the war, modern architecture was in crisis, and with the Team 10 in the 50s, they tried to reinvent a form of modern architecture. One of the streams, to put it quickly, was to see how it adapted in the tropics, Brazil, Japan, Morocco, and so on. And there's a lot of goodwill in it. There's always good intentions. And there's nothing worse in an architectural agenda than good intentions. And sustainability is just good intentions. This building, which was the cover of L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui, which was one of the flagship building at the Team 10 in Aix-en-Provence in 53, we did a big exhibition in 1998 on Casablanca, which I was with, and I was charged of going to photograph this building. I had the address, I knew the neighborhood. It took me 3 hours to find it, even though I was right in front of it, because it was this. And for me, this space between those two things is the failure of an architecture that is only goodwill. And that's everything I try to avoid when I start to do a project. An architectural project doesn't make people's life better. It doesn't solve a problem. It's not a medicine. It's not a cure. When you look at these two buildings, in here, Candilis tried to reinvent the patio housing, the traditional ways that Arabs live. So what he did is, by the way, it's an incredibly beautiful building. Don't get me wrong. I love this building. So he takes the patio, he suspends it, and then he creates a series of composition. These are two buildings here. We call it Nida Bay, beehive. How do you say beehive in Spanish? Not the word. Okay. Beehive and Semiramis. And they're two reinterpretation of the traditional city, because that's what Arab wants. The Arabs want to live in a patio house. Actually, all the Arabs want is an extra bedroom. And that's all there is to it. This kind of agenda that comes so strongly by saying architecture should be doing this never goes very far, because architecture has to be plastic, has to be transformable. It cannot be finite. And the problem of sustainability is that with all of its goodwill, it has finite dimensions. So I'm going to have 5 propositions for you, and I'll snap them as quickly as I can, for what I think would be a relevant form of sustainable architecture. The first one is necessity. When you start by having sustainable agenda in a project, it often is the first thing that goes away when you start costing it, because it's too expensive, nobody wants to pay for it, even though it's good for the planet. It's good in the long term for you in 20 years, because you're going to pay less electricity, the building will have better insulation, but in the end, it's the first thing that comes away, because it's not necessary. The only way to make a sustainable approach work is to embed it so deeply in the project that if you take it away, there is no more project. So this sustainability by necessity, we've tried it a few times. It's easier when you work in places where there's room for necessity and there's room for invention. We've worked on a new city, a new township, in 20 kilometers in the south of Rabat, the capital of Morocco. By the way, a lot of the work that you will see today is what my office has done in Morocco for the past 10 years. I focused on this. We could have talked about other things, but Fernando wanted a look from Morocco on sustainability. So here I am. Building a new city is frowned upon. People don't like to do this because we have bad examples in Europe. Post-war, we built a lot of urbanization that don't work very well. And we would all like to build old cities, but you can't build old cities, they're already there. You can build on old cities. And all the urban planning discipline, urbanism, has always been defined as a way to grow city, not to make city. And the way we make city is by mimicking existing models that are already layered and ancient and layered in its architecture and urbanism, but also in social behavior and in history and in memories. And even though we shouldn't build new cities, maybe, we have to, because in the last 10 years, in the next 20 years, we're going to urbanize 2 billion people. We can't do it on existing infrastructure. In Morocco in particular, most of the cities are inheritance of 10 centuries of development and 60 years of colonial infrastructure. And they work well. Casablanca, Rabat, Marrakesh, Tanger, Meknes, they all work. But they kind of are cracking in their infrastructure. It's not holding anymore. So the state is proposing, has been proposing, to of course grow the cities for the ones that should grow, but also to build new townships, much like in China or in Brazil or in, South Africa, because that's the way we have to do it. I'm not even considering the value, whether it's a good or bad thing. It's happening. So we just need to get on board in a smart way. But building cities has always been at the foundation of the architectural discipline. I showed this drawing by Filaret. It's a drawing of Sforzinda. It's a city drawn for Prince 1453. And it always asks basic question that we don't ask anymore in architecture, or where's the wind, where's the sun, where's the soil, where's the water, where are things, and where's the there? And that's how we start. So we didn't want to draw a city, but we had to do a city. So what we've proposed is to look at this territory that's 3,000 hectares. It's huge. So that's the city of Rabat. And it's down the river in a beautiful valley that for a strange reason has never been developed. The way we decided to look at this place, that looks part of it like Andalusia, part of it looks like the countryside behind Florence. I mean, it's just incredible. The topography, the valley, the wheat, the wine, the grapes, everything. It's a dream, this site. When you compare it, that's Manhattan, and that's our little city here. It's one half of the city of Paris. It's insane. It's as big as the city of Rabat. Sorry. Oops. All right. That's the city of Rabat here. It's the same size. So it makes no sense to urbanize on such large territories so far from the city. So what we try to do is find ways in which it could happen. Now, here's how it works normally. The state decides to build a new place, but then it brings all the infrastructure in, right? The state has to bring you the water, the roads, the electricity, the sewage, and the telephone. The problem is that this was a privately owned land, and the state has no money. This is not Spain, this is not France. So he's like, okay, we allow you to do whatever you want here, but don't ask us for anything. We're not going to bring you anything at the entry of the site. So we had two choices. Either do a project for 2,500 people, because that's how much infrastructure was on site, or try to dimension how many people could live here if we had to harvest all the resources from the site. So in every sustainable conversation, you have two mammals, water and energy. Say in Western architecture, the focus is on energy because the needs, the reticulated of the domestic homes, put an emphasis on this. When you're in Morocco, water is the base. That's how you decide to see whether a place is livable. So what we decided to do is to see how much water this 3,000 hectare can hold and design a city for this many people. There's something a little bit crazy in saying we're going to do a city for 127,233 people. You know when Le Corbusier built l'unité d'habitation, not that big, the name of the building is l'unité d'habitation de grandeur conforme, meaning it has its own dimension. So we did une ville nouvelle de grandeur conforme. It's almost sounds like a joke, but in reality, if the city reaches 127,382 people, then the level of infrastructure that's produced within will allow it to grow in increments. So what we had to do is do what farmers do, which is plow the land for months and months and months. And by looking at what it is, its organization, its topography and slopes, looking at the fact that there are already 3 little valleys. There are some natural dams which we can strengthen. With this natural dam, we realized we could harvest 20 million cubic meter per year. Then what we decided to do is to connect all of the streams to protect where the water goes. And that created a water network, a blue network. And then we decided that there's some areas that are not buildable, very difficult topography, forest, protected land. We took all the spaces that are in between this blue network and we subdivided it like a series of farms. In a city, an urban block is in New York 1.5 hectare. In Paris, 2,500 square meter. In Madrid, an urban block is about 3,000 square meter, right? In here, the urban block is the urban parcel, the rural parcel. So each parcel is 5 to 10 hectares. So it is, to start, just a series of farm. Nobody lives there. We made it to work like a gigantic farm. The green elements you see are the elements that we will keep farming because they're on the hills and they protect where the water goes down. And then we look at all the existing roads that connect to the main accesses to the city, how they get reticulated, all with what's there. And by superimposing these elements of what's built, what's unbuilt, and what's unbuiltable, and by connecting 3 networks of blue, green, and white, hydrology, vegetation and farms, and roads, we create a sense of centrality. And then instead of saying, okay, everything else that's not farmed is going to be built like a carpet, we said, no, we don't want that. It's not a city. It's a network of villages that's going to be, we need to create density so it doesn't look like a, so we said, okay, what are the interesting points, the high points, the places that had already farm building, the places that are already part of the history and the memory of the site. And we created an element that is not the drawing of a city, but is the rule to colonize agricultural land. And in the end, that's what all cities are. They are the colonization of agricultural pattern. If you go to Paris and go to Saint-Germain-des-Prés, very high neighborhood, Saint-Germain-des-Prés is still built on farmland, and the farm roads are still there. They're the one that structure the city. So what we needed to create is not a drawing of a city, but is a rule to colonize and densify a piece of land based on a single element of how much water we can harvest. It sounds like a fiction, but this thing is being built. And we're working on these 3 neighborhoods right now. It's a fascinating piece of project because obviously now the state, who didn't believe that it could work, they're like, okay, just show us how it works so we can do it everywhere else. Because it's a civilizational issue. It is not how you build a city, but how you can live in the countryside. How you can create something that's not urban, that's not suburban, but that it has its own entropy next to a city. And obviously it creates a dramatic landscape of how the dams work and so on. This work started in 2006 and has been ongoing since. It's a pretty humongous design, big drawing. One of the most interesting part of this has been the programming of the agricultural lands. Obviously, you can't just say, I'm going to make wheat or I'm going to make grapes. Each land is proper for one type of things because of topography, soil, water, and so on. So it created also identities of landscape, of neighborhood, of centralities, and it created this rule of occupying a piece of land, nothing else. And we are in the process now of bringing other architects who already been working with us on this to start designing elements in it, to see how they can bend the rules to make something out of this. So necessity, it only worked because we had no choice. We were forced to invest a huge amount of money on a sustainable, water-based urban development. If we had the choice, I promise we would not have gone that way. So unless you can create that necessity in the project, sustainability is just a goodwill fiction. The opposite, obsolescence. One of my favorite pictures. In 2007, our French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, a humanist, if there was one, welcomed Muammar Gaddafi, which was also not a humanist from Libya at the time, way before the Arab Spring. And Gaddafi came to Paris and he did his shopping. He bought guns, he bought radars, he bought everything. But they also signed a series of agreements. One of them is for France to help do the planning of all Libyan cities. Until 2007, all the planning of urban cities, be it the large cities or the small cities, had been done by Russia, USSR, and then Russia. So they were very heavily zoned with very modernist form of planification. So the state gave it to a big public institution, which is in charge of planning all the region of Paris, called Yerevan. So what they did is they took the two nice pieces for them. They took Benghazi and they took Tripoli and the region, and there was the entire desert. They didn't know what to do with it, so they launched a competition and we won it. So we worked from 2007 to the end of 2010, 3 months before the Arab Spring. And we worked in what we call the Fezzan. The Fezzan is the southern part of Libya. It's almost the Darfur. You're right next to Somalia, right? The reason why France and Europe is investing so heavily there, it's because really the Fezzan is not the southern border of Libya, it's the southern border of Europe. African comes to Libya, Libyans come to southern Spain, Spanish goes to Paris, Paris goes, there's a effet billard, I don't know how you call that, there's a pool effect, right? So they needed to create a desirable urban environment, not to talk about Islamist terrorism, instability in the Darfur, all horrible things we could talk about. That being said, for those of you who have not been there, Libya is one of the most beautiful countries to visit. It is incredible. So we went there, and the first thing we realized is that, see, that is the desert. And these are the cities along the desert. The desert works like the sea. It obliges people to build along it, like a rosary. The people who do prayers, okay. So if you go to any coastal town, which coastal area, which Spain has plenty, the cities are all connected to each other and they're all facing the ocean. It works exactly like this. The problem we have here is that this entire region is sitting on a water table. I mean, there's a huge amount of fossil water, a huge amount of it. So much that Gaddafi, being a little bit nuts, was bringing the water from the desert to the coast to do agriculture. But the problem with this water, it doesn't regenerate. It's been trapped here for millions of years, and one day it's going to disappear. So we had to do the planning of 50 settlements that included the capital of Fezzan, Sebha, the four main cities, Brak, Ubari, Murzouk, El Qatroun, and Rat, and all the small cities. And after 6 months of looking at all of these things, the first thing we said is we cannot plan all of the cities separately. We have to plan it as an organic system. The second thing is that we proposed something radical and almost anti-urban. As I was telling before, urbanism is a discipline of growth. It was invented in the late 19th century to organize how, after the Industrial Revolution, European cities were going to grow. Here, we propose to actually shrink cities, and we propose to have some cities disappear. So the strategy that we propose is to make Sabha a metropole, to metropolize it, to strengthen the 5 main cities, and all the rest to plan their disappearance in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. For a simple reason is that there's not water for everyone. There's not water for every place. So it doesn't sound like we're nice people, but if you want to allow 2 more generations to live in Sebha, you've got to cut all of that, all of that, all of that. So obviously, when you go see a mayor of a city and say, it's beautiful, and I know you grew up here and your grandparents grew up here, but in 10 years we're closing down. It's very difficult, and we don't do it lightly. But again, it's a violent form of sustainability. If you cannot do and make these decisions, then you're in the business of goodwill. And then 10 years later, nobody has a resource. So what we did is work in an insane environment. Compared to Libya, Morocco is like Switzerland, right, in terms of organization. There is no representative. Everything was a direct democracy. So we presented the plans and options maybe 200 times, right? So Right now, the city, as it's organized, has an old. Let me go back. The city, as it's organized, has its old element here. That's the old settlement. And then it grew after a ring road. They're fascinated by ring roads there, here. And after that, they started spreading a little bit everywhere. So we proposed several scenarios, different ways of approaching this. And in the end, what was accepted is to say, okay, we won't create a delimitation in one city, but we'll create three areas which already exist, and we'll metropolize these three elements and stop the train that was continuing, stop it where it is, and make it a terminus town. It's extremely violent as an approach, but in the end, this kind of urban planning we have to face in Spain. We have to face in Detroit, where we've built and built and built and built, and there's a point where, you know, we have to shrink, and this shrinkage needs some new tools, and that's what we developed and invented in Libya. And honestly, when I fly over Madrid and to land in Barajas, I see many places that are need to be given back to nature in one way or another in a very short term, or need to find new ways to use them. The third proposal, and I'm going to try to pick up the pace, is to question the notion of identity in sustainability. I told you there's either, on the one hand, the grassroots post-68, post-colonial tree hugger, earth people that want to say, okay, we love how the indigenous people do it, on the one hand, so passeist. And on the other hand, you have the techie, let's all build solar farm people. The problem is neither one of them is relevant culturally. They're both not adapted. The uh, the fascination for indigenous architecture doesn't answer the simple question of why they don't do it anymore. If they can answer that question, I'm the first one to follow them. But to create the desire for that form of constructibility is complicated, and we will talk about it later. And the other one seems to be a series of imported models that also is very tied to industrial fabrication, which has some strong lobbies, and makes it difficult to fabricate something relevant. So this question of identity bugs me because we always face with it. Wherever we work, we're asked to do something that represents something, that represents a place. Especially when you work in places like Morocco. I mean, if you work in Spain, nobody go ask Fernando, do us something Spanish, please, right? Whereas when we work in Morocco, we are faced with the question of what is Moroccan architecture? Is it arcades and grid tiles and pseudo-traditional? Is it modernist colonial? Is it a reinvention of postmodernism? Is it completely global and just materially oriented? We have to answer this question over and over again, and to be honest, it's a little bit tiresome. That being said, I'm going to talk about one project that I've enjoyed immensely doing. A big company in Morocco called OCP, which deals in phosphates, launched a big competition to do a university in the middle of nowhere in Ben Guir. It's a company town. They do phosphates, that's where they have the company, and they want to do generally a university for 50,000 students. It's linked with MIT. It's huge, right? But they want it to be the flagship of Morocco. It has to represent Moroccan identity. It's going to be the Moroccan university. Needless to say, I'm the wrong guy for the job. So what we came to say is, okay, there is no Moroccan architecture. There are many Moroccan architecture. It goes from the Casbahs of the south to the Medinas of the Andalusian town to the colonial reconstruction of Casablanca to the transformation of this. And what we created from the 8x8 frame of Candilis, which was an 8 meter by 8 meter frame that was carpet bombed all over Morocco to resorb the slums. From the traditional Medinas to the Ksurs, to the Casbahs, and we said, okay, let's build a taxonomy, almost like an alphabet of elements from these things that is just a spatial relationship between inside and outside that can be translated in the relationship between public space, common space, private space, and intimate space, right? So define all the threshold in these things. And from this taxonomy, we created a series of buildings that were voided of program, meaning in these things you could put anything. They were not built for a program. These are generic architectural dimensions in which you can put student housing or a classroom or an office or a lab. And we started by creating this series of typology almost as a joke, but one that would make sense because obviously we wanted something extremely compact that created a sense of place. So here we told them, hey, there's not one Morocco, there's many. And if you were really interested in this, we could do this. But at that point, it's not about drawing something. It's about playing together to make it happen. So we did the presentation exactly like this. We came with lots of different things, and we started organizing it in different possible ways. Why? Because that's how you build a campus. It cannot be an image. Again, what we propose is a process of urbanizing and building a place made of elements of parts. This relationship between the element and the part is, for me, a strong part of what make an identity of being in Morocco. It's not about the form. It's not even about the materiality. It's a relationship between the elements and the parts, which can be done this way or that way or that way or that. It doesn't. Well, we didn't win this competition, just so you know. Ricardo Bofill won, and that gives you a sense of what they wanted. This is 1, 2, 3. This is 4, right? 4. Materiality. We've seen some beautiful things today, visiting the square, looking at Fernando's work, and I took it. I made it on purpose not to talk about any project in detail, just giving you a sense of what we do. We work with materials like we're cooks, right? We like to touch things, and if there's one thing that's very different between Europe, where I have my practice, and Morocco, is that the relationship between the material and the work is reversed. In Europe, material is cheap, labor is expensive. In Morocco, labor is cheap and material is expensive. So if you try to build a Peter Zumthor building in Rabat, it's not going to happen. And the same way the other way around. So we've learned not to consider that you can design in the same way everywhere. You got to understand some major paradigm. It doesn't have to be understanding how the ceramics, or you have to understand that labor is cheap and material is expensive. So you can use cheap material and put a lot of work into it and create some pretty amazing things. So I'm going to talk about one building in particular. We finished a few years back in Volubilis. Volubilis is one of the most beautiful Roman remains in northern Africa. It was the most western outpost of the Roman Empire, meaning if you were naughty and if you did something bad, that's where you were sent. But what makes Volubilis beautiful is that it hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The plain, the countryside of the Zarhon, hasn't changed in 2,000 years. And that's a unique feature. When UNESCO made Volubilis a World Monument Protected, I don't know how you call it in English, it's the landscape and the city. Because the city itself makes only sense in this environment. Volubilis is the most visited archaeological site of Morocco. And it's absolutely incredible. It's sited here, but it's in the middle of the country. It's between Meknes and Fez. And because the development of the 20th century moved to the coast, in Tangier and Rabat, Casablanca, Agadir, it left this area a little bit preserved. So when the French arrived in the early 20s, they started rebuilding the city in terms of its archaeology, and they built a few buildings inside the environment. I'll get there quickly. They built some very modest colonial structure, very elegant, super refined, very nice. The problem is, not being Roman, as you can see here, there's a ridge, right? There's a little bit of a valley. The entire site is here. The Romans built everywhere but here, because there, the mechanics of the ground were bad. The ground is of a bad quality. Romans knew that, not the French. So when we arrived, we looked at things that looked like lived in an earthquake, right? This kind of structural failure is typical of earthquake zones. The problem is UNESCO has a very strong dogma of saying if it's old, it's good. If it's there, it stays. So our proposal, and the Minister of Culture came to us and say, let's build something awesome here. We need to, make an imprint on the site, get rid of this, build something new. UNESCO was like, impossible. If you do that, I'm gonna take down Volbis from the list of protected, world monument. No. So 1.5 years of negotiation. One day, I went to the Minister of Culture's house, who's right here because he's from the region, Moulay Idriss. So say at this scale, he would be here. He grew up there. He played soccer in Volubilis all of his life. And he's like, I can't take these people anymore. They keep sending us experts and Italian architects who don't, he couldn't take it. Like, what should we do? He said, well, we're meeting them on Tuesday. It was Thursday. We're meeting them in 5 days. Let's just tear down the whole thing. And we do the meeting there. So impossible to get the money to do it from the state. So I actually paid from my pocket to bring in bulldozers. We took everything down in one weekend, and we did the meeting right there and said, so what do we do now? Obviously, they were not very happy with us, but they started listening, and we started engaging in a conversation. It's a joke, but it also shows that it is sometimes important to be in your own country without having to always follow rules that are imposed to you. Because those rules are dogmas that need to be challenged. And if you can't challenge them, you're still in your own place. And you've got to be able to take a stance. One of his finest hours. We've always been fascinated by some elements in the landscape that orients everything that's around it. And one of the things you see in the south of Morocco are these things that we call mislat. This one is not a very particularly beautiful one. It's just actually in Marrakesh, just outside of the city, but in the mountain, there are hundreds of them. And sometimes they're just a wall and a few steps, and that's it. And you don't know what these things are because they're used once a year for this. There's one per year that's used for Eid al-Adha. It's the thing where they slaughter the sheep and happy to eat it. And that is something that always stayed in my memory since I was a kid. The capacity for something to be the memory of an event, even though it doesn't happen all the time. And it's a structuring piece of the landscape. And the line, its thickness and its position in the landscape is something that always fascinated us. So, and obviously there are other fine examples of that. The project for Volubilis for us was to inscribe something that had no architectonic dimension. No doors, no windows, no. It was a building that we wanted to change the relationship to the site. Those little French colonial buildings, they were the only thing that would stop the view as you enter because they were high. So the first thing we said is we'll make the high point of the building lower than the lower point of the entry. So the building is buried, if you will. But it gets buried and suspended. We also wanted the building to be a dam. How do you say that in Spanish? To stop the water. How do you call that? Yeah, because the land is bad. So you need a very big concrete element to hold the land. When you're a student and you want to do project that seems like it fit well in the site, what they don't teach you is that in order to put a building inside a hill, you have to take the hill, move it away, put the building, bring back the hill. It's actually extremely violent. It's not at all something that comes and is very sympathetic to the land. Last but not least, the most important part for us, we had absolutely no money whatsoever. We built this entire thing for something like, I don't know, 2 million euros. Right? The construction took almost 6 years because we worked with very local craftsmen, and all we had to work with were 3 materials: the wood, the cedar wood that we could find, concrete because it's cheap and everybody knows it, and the stone quarries of Volubilis, which are the same stone they used to build the city. And we wanted to make sure that the building, we didn't want to do a Roman building. We didn't want to do something that dialogues with the ruins. We didn't want to do something that's a mimic. We wanted something that has in itself inscribed its own disparition, meaning the building should show how it would become a ruin. Not every material has the same resistance. Stone, concrete, wood, and the rest of the landscape, they disappear at a different rate. In a ruin, what the first thing that strikes us is the relationship between inside and outside gets erased. The weather threshold, the door, the glass, whatever it is, goes away. So we wanted to make sure that not only we inscribe the duration of the building in the architecture, but also that there is no relationship between inside and outside, that you're always out or in or both. And he created a building where we had to invent processes that were very simple. You arrive here, that's a high point. You go down to one platform. In this direction, you have all the elements for the site that are not accessible to the public. That's the labs, the housing for the archaeologists, the housing for the curator of the site, the research areas, the library, and so on. And in this site, you have all the public areas, the small site museum, bathrooms, very important, cafes, and that sort of thing. It also happens that it's the site that's most visited by students. As a kid, every kid in Morocco has been to Volubilis in one way or another, because all the schools go there. So I wanted to make sure that the building isn't the building, but it's a promenade that you go through. Those are the two levels. I'm going to go quickly through them. Those are the section I talked about, where the building starts at, this is the highest, the lowest point of the site, and we only go down from it. So when you get very close to the building, you would see something like this. That's how you feel the entry. And obviously, there are two dams, two very large concrete walls are 1 meter wide, and they go 8 meters down to hold the earth. And then you start going through the rest of the building. That's the first platform we talked about. The building is cranked to be oriented toward l'Arc de Caracalla, which is the main orientation of the site. This is one of my favorite places in the building. It's just the stair, but we made it in such a way that it becomes an auditorium for the kids. Volubilis, it gets very quickly 50 degrees outside, right? It gets really, really hot. So it's all about creating spaces for shade. And that's this little space. So when I went 2 months ago, there was 40 kids here and their teacher just being able to talk before they go to the visit. They go, they come back, and they leave this way. If you have a look at it, you'll see that the wood and the concrete are exactly the same dimension. Not because we had such amazing craftsmen, but because we had so little money that we built the formwork to do the concrete with the cedar wood. Once we took out the formwork, we dried the wood, on l'a poncé, we cleaned it, we let it dry again for 7 months, and then we treated it, and we hang it to use it as a double skin for the building and for all the menuiserie. So we get to an incredible level of detail just because we use one material to do two things. And that, for me, is sustainability. The building you'll only see like this on the way back, to go back to leave the town. See, that's what I was talking about. I mean, when you look at it, it looks like it was done in my garage, literally. Okay, so 5. How am I doing on time? All right. So after the necessity, the obsolescence, the materiality, and the identity, one of the questions that is at the very heart of everything we do, and is to me the key notion of sustainability, is what architecture has to do to re-inject public space. We are in a moment where everywhere in the world, including in developing countries, the state is redrawing, reduces its perimeters, and it's starting to give large pieces of development, be it in Dubai, be it in Paris or Spain or Morocco, to private developers. And it creates something that looks like cities, something that looks like public spaces because of roads and sidewalks and so on. But it doesn't function like it. In a way, in a city, you have the regalian structure, the police, the firemen, and then you have the private. And this gray area of who supplies the water, who supplies the electricity, how is it managed, how is it cleaned, how do we take out the trash, all of that moved slowly from the public realm to the private realm. And what it creates is that we still draw architecture the way it used to be used. So it looks like it's like that, but it's not used like this anymore. So we're trying to be very careful to re-inject this sense of publicness, because what we live in every kind of project we do is a slide from the public to the common. Public means state, means the city, means your taxes at work. The common means the community, people who are like me. I'm in a community of people, and we manage this space. And then the other community is next to me, and they manage their space. And that's everything that architecture has to fight against, because we are here to create hybridity, impure things, connections, messy things. We're not here to build pure elements that don't touch each other. And in every project, I'm going to show a few. This notion of re-injecting the public prerogative in any kind of project, at every scale, is very important. Okay, this is a competition for the National Theatre in Casablanca. They invited Christian Porzenpark and Norman Foster and Zaha Hadid and Frank Gehry and me to do this. It's a fantastic site. This is Casablanca, the old town here, the new town, and at the intersection of both, the traditional colonial square. In all Moroccan cities, you have a big square at the end of the Medina, the end of the avenue, where you have the National Bank, the courthouse, the police station, the post office. And there was an empty lot here. There's one element here that was unbuilt, and this is where they wanted to build the project. This is the main square of Casablanca. And what we propose is, instead of building the theater here, which would be to complete the scheme, on access with the tribunal, you would have then the theater, the tribunal, the police, and the post office. We said, let's build the theater on the square. Why? Because the tradition of performance in Morocco is not one of like this, where you listen to me. It's one of people being surrounded. It's always an interaction. The tradition of the halqa, which is the oral tradition of telling tales and stories, is one where, you know, they go from town to town and village to village, and when they sit and they have people all around them. This notion that the theater isn't a frontal facade, but is a space that can be crossed with element is something we wanted to explore. So what we did is we said, okay, there's already a series of mega blocks that are developed by colonial reinterpretation of what the Medina was. And we said, let's work with this mega block. And instead of putting our building here, let's put it there. So we have the two theaters, the main theater, the secondary theater, which they function absolutely the way they're supposed to, but they're connected with a space on the ground plane that is porous. So you can walk through it at day, at night, and the stages can open to the public space on top of opening to this area. So it works exactly like a theater should work, but it also allows for the space not to be sanctuarized. All of a sudden, it's not about having money and being able to go in. It's about being able to go there and have somebody who sells fake DVDs and have somebody who walks his dog, and that's the space you want to create. So the cut plan looks something like this, where the public space that has an existing fountain is still here. We create a big garden, which is very much needed in the city that doesn't have one. Obviously, we didn't win because the land wasn't ours. But the problem of these kinds of project is, you know, it's very late in the office. It's 3 weeks before you turn it in, and then you do it. And once you do it, you can't go back. You have to, because you know you can't win because you're building on public land. It's not what you're supposed to do. But once you see it, you just have no choice. Another question of this public prerogative is something, it's a small project that resonates a little bit with what we saw with the Fernando today. We were asked to do in front of the only quote-unquote tower in Rabat. Rabat is a very horizontal city. Everything is R+5, and here you have an R+17 building. It's a big public company called La Caisse des Dépôts, Adeje, as it's building there. And in front of it, there used to be a very old flower market that was closed. It was just a big roundabout that you can go on. And we were asked to build 4 levels of parking. That was our brief. So we said, okay, we like the notion, but let's not build a parking. Let's build a parking under a plaza. The problem is, in Rabat, the public space is commercial. Yeah, if there's no shops, there's nobody. Okay, and it's déambulatoire. People walk. right? When I go to Rabat, I want to meet my friends. I say, let's meet at the train station, and then we walk down the boulevard, up the boulevard, down the boulevard. There's no plaza. Plaza is a negotiated space. It's a controlled space. And in this case, we didn't have a plaza. Luckily, that's my déambulatoire space. We didn't have a plaza. It was a big, that's the building. That's what we made out of. Okay, let's go back to this. Yeah, the only examples of plaza that we have in Morocco that works is Jemelfna. Jemelfna is in Marrakesh, and it's probably one of the most beautiful square in the world because A, it's not square, but it has no dimension. It's always negotiated between cars and people who sell food and people who do magic and people who jump in the sky and monkeys and snake and tourists and people from Marrakesh. It's throughout the day and at night and in the morning. Sometimes it's very, very small, and sometimes it takes the entire space. And this kind of negotiation is something we were interested in. But in order for that to work, you needed to find a way for commercial space not to be this, because everybody likes Jemelfna. But the reality is that commercial space in places like Morocco are malls. I would like it to be different, but that's the way it is. People like malls. They like to park their car, and they like to go in air-conditioned space to buy something they already have 5 items of at home. That's the way it is. So we needed to find a way that we inject commercial parking. Thank God we had the parking, and also create a desire to be there. The problem is, I'll go back. The problem is we're at the intersection of the 2 main streets of the city, right? 2 main connections, north-south and east-west. And essentially the whole thing is a big roundabout where it's almost impossible to cross, to go to it. So what we propose is very simple in the end, but took 3 years to convince, is to make this road and this road pedestrian. So all of a sudden, this entire place was connected to the train station. So you didn't need to endanger your life to actually go there. And we sunk it in such a way that the commercial space here and here is just in the fold between the public level and downstairs. All of a sudden, it created an interiority, which took a long time for people to get used to use, because a building people swallow quickly. Public space are habits; they're complicated to change quickly. And in the end, I don't show this when I do the lecture in Morocco because we had the presentation made to the king 9 times. Everything in Rabat in particular gets gone through him, and he's a delicious man. It's not the problem, but this is his handmade comments. So we had several of these. One of them was to propose to do a ice skating ring because he had just come back from New York and he had seen in the winter the Rockefeller Center. One of them was to put a fountain. One of them is to put a big clock. The thing is, if they see a place, they need something in it. They can't imagine that you don't do anything in it and it's just what people are going to make out of it. They're just not comfortable because public space is controlled. If you don't control it, you don't know what people may do, and therefore it's always a liability. And in the end, it works very well, and people have fun with it, and people use it for concerts, and it works. By the way, engineers are always a little bit afraid when they see this because it was not meant for this. That's that. Another quick example of how we can deal with public prerogative in a project that has nothing to do with it. We're asked to design a. You remember my university project? So we lost that competition. So they gave this thing right next to it as a consolation prize. Okay. So we loved your project. We can't do it. So it's a sports center, Deportivo. I don't know how you call it here, but the site is very big, and there's not that much program. And the site is weird, right? It's kind of weird shape, and it's middle of nowhere. So what we said, okay, let's find a way to make all the public part of the program in one element that can define the rest of the site. So we started, finding ways in which the thickness of the wall can be inhabited on both sides, and then project all the sports activities inside. So all of a sudden, instead of building a fence at the limit of the site, we build a huge infrastructure that's 300-meter long, but almost in the middle, 1/3 inside the site, to create all of this space here and have the publicness part of the site works on both in both elements. So this obviously did not exist. What we build is an element that is not at the alignment, and all of this program is open on both sides. One last example of this notion of publicness and its relationship to the urban dimension. This is a very ugly plan of a typical development, suburban development given to a private developer in Morocco. So this is actually the old zoo where you had lions and giraffes and all that. And they decided to build on 50 hectares 1.7 million square meters. So a lot of square meters right at the entrance of the city. And it makes no sense because the main access of the city is here. And this is just a geometrical composition where the center is in the middle. I've never seen a city where the center is in the middle, but that's that. The only place they couldn't build is an old cemetery. Everything else is built, and they try to mimic what a city looks like. But it's a city on steroids, right? Instead of this dimension being 25 meters and building being 5 stories, this is 18 meters and buildings are 9 or 10 stories. So it makes no sense. It just looks like something you know. So they started building this entire area here. And it was so bad that the city stopped it and said, okay, we're going to do something about this. Let's launch a competition and see what comes in. So again, the same usual one, the Foster, the Nouvelle, the Valor de Pistre, Abalos Herreros, the Spanish one, responded to this competition. And in this case, we actually won. And we're building it. And what we did is very simple. We said we need to de-urbanize the site. Stop looking at it as a series of urban blocks and create mega blocks. Obviously, we couldn't lose 1 square meter. So what we did is we multiplied the green space by 6. We divided the road by 3. We kept the exact same density. And we kept all the elements of the zoo as it is by creating this strange sense of urban block, but so distorted that there is no courtyard. There is no back. The streets are sometimes at the alignment and sometimes they cross the block. And when you cross the block, this becomes a public space instead of being just the back of the city. So that's what we had, and that's what we're proposing. Sectionally, it's very simple. And in a way, sometimes the best way to increase the density is to decrease the density. I'm going to skip this one. It's going to take too long. I'll skip it. All right. I'll finish with one thing. We have an office that works in lots of different places, and we love working in Morocco. We're based out of Paris. We go to Morocco very often. We're fortunate enough to work everywhere, but there's a strong part of our DNA, the office, is to have a form of social involvement. We always have been engaged, and that's the absolutely only advice I give to students when I can, is the only way to do this job properly is to get engaged. The way we've done it, and that comes from a personal political inheritance, is to be as active as we can for issues of patrimony. We created an association that's called Casa Mémoire 15 or 17 years ago. That was the first one to start to preserve the modernist patrimony in Casablanca. We take over lots of spaces and create different elements in it. And I'm going to show 2 or 3 elements of this activist dimension of the office. But with Lina, my wife, who's not here unfortunately, we took it into an office structure. Everybody who works in the office has to donate 1/5 of their time to pro bono projects that don't make any money, projects that cost money. Whether it's teaching or being involved in association or deciding to take over a slaughterhouse or doing art projects. And those, sometimes they're related to architecture, sometimes they're not related to architecture. And sometimes it takes 1/5 and sometimes it takes 3/5 of somebody for a while. But it is essential to how we understand the world and how we engage with it. It's okay to have, for us, to have a very strong commercial dimension. I mean, we we work, we have clients, we build them, they pay us money. We have 60 families that live of it, and it's normal, and there's no shame in it. But it's also important to us to donate some of that time, some of that money to things that you wouldn't do otherwise. Okay, and I'm going to talk about a couple of these projects, which are very important to us. This is the first project I ever did. Morocco has a very strong Jewish community, always has, and still is very important to the culture. There's a very big patrimony, and my office and myself have worked with the Jewish community for 16 years. The first project I did was in 1998. I did a rehabilitation of a small synagogue and a library that's 4 hours drive from Agadir in the mountains, in nowhere. You're 4 hours from everything. At the time, no TV, no cell phone, no nothing. We were three. It was I had a worker with me, myself, and Paco, which was the donkey. And I spent 6 months there, rehabilitating something that, if you look at it, it has all the simplicity of the thickness and the lightness and the relation to the ground and the sacredness in things. I'm not a religious man. I don't believe in any higher power, but when you're there, it's very hard to be like that. And this is how it started, the library. There was nothing, right? Paco was somewhere in the back. And this relationship of being able to give time, at the time I had a lot of time, granted. I have less time now, but I still do this, and it's very important to me. A project we took on 4 years ago, there was a big slaughterhouse in the middle of Casablanca, huge slaughterhouse, and the city wanted to sell it to a big developer to do one of those bad developments I've showed you. And we went to the city and said, okay, don't do this. Give it to us for 2 years. We'll do something out of it. In 2 years, we'll see. Okay? You're not in a hurry. Give it to us for 2 years. So we created a kibbutz of sorts. Every possible association, NGOs, private enterprise were brought in. We raised a ton of money, and we took over. And the first event we did was in 2010, so 4 years ago already, 2010. We invited 10 architects, 10 painters, 10 sculptors, 10 people who do video art, and so on and so on and so forth. And we took over the entire place for the time of a weekend to do installations. It's in the middle of a very working class neighborhood. Biggest joy for me was that the entire neighborhood not only got it, but they were part of the economy of the event, right? The food stalls in front of it that were selling, skewers meat. We started to do a ticket system with them, right? So we would pay them in advance, and they would give food to the workers. The security was made by the young kids of the neighborhood. We didn't have one single policeman in the entire element, which in Morocco at the time was quite something to say, and it works. And the reason why I love this space, it's very much like Volubilis. It's a ruin. There's no difference between outside and inside. The most incredible thing to see in a slaughterhouse, and I engage all of the students who are interested in architecture to look at this, is the ground. The ground is made to get blood and water and waste to circulate. So the ground is such an incredible sophistication of topography and groove and materiality that you could almost walk your way through it by understanding what used to be there just by looking at that. So people did many things. What we did is an installation with the industrial ice that are used in slaughterhouses in the harbor. We built a house. It was very hot. It was the summer. That we put together in one night, and it melted down through the weekend. And at the end, it was finished. That's all it was. That's us, a little bit younger and thinner, and all throughout the weekend, and at the end, nothing. And it was obviously suspended to the hooks so it didn't touch the ground, the hooks of the places. One last element to talk about this kind of active space is something that got me to know my friend Fernando here, and I thank him for inviting me here. We created the Pavilion of Morocco for the current Architectural Biennale, and it's something that nobody asked us to do. It's not like I got a phone call someday and said, "Don't you want to do this?" Nobody. We went to the previous one and we had an award for something in 2012 there, and we talked to the people in Vienna and said, "Oh, that would be nice. Morocco's never been there. How can we do this?" And so we start putting together a huge machinery to do that, and that's because there's nobody to talk to. So we created a foundation, we raised the money, we invited people, we took care of the scientific content, but also the airplane tickets and the food and you've got to do everything. And we did this project with the notion that we wanted to respond to Rem Koolhaas' fundamentals. We wanted to see 1914, 2014, the fundamentals of architecture. What can we still learn about architecture and the discipline? And our response was to call it fundamentalism with two parts. One that was historical, because that's what was asked for us. And we chose one building per decade from 1914 to 1984, all modeled at the same scale, that showed the transformation of housing and urbanity in Morocco. And its only contribution is to have been a place of incredible radical experimentation, which is why we call it fundamentalism. And we wanted this experimentation that stopped in the 80s. The 80s were a bad time everywhere for architecture. They're a pretty bad time in Morocco, mostly politically. And in Morocco, we had in the 80s a form of autocratic postmodernism, state-sponsored postmodernism, if you want, that culminated with this Mosque Hassan II that maybe you've seen, this big mosque in Casablanca. And it took us 30 years to come out of that. And we wanted to celebrate the fact that now the contemporary scene in Morocco is interesting, and there's a lot of very talented people that work there. And in order to reactivate this tradition of invention, we invited 8 architects, some Moroccans, but some foreign, because the tradition in Morocco is always to have been a land of welcoming other influences. It's never been to be closed. And that's how we grow. We take everything, we twist it, we make it into something else, which I should show you what I'm making of Fernando's work now. That's for later. So in order to reactivate that, we asked 8 architects to investigate how we can inhabit the Sahara. The Sahara is a very disputed territory in Morocco. Moroccans think it's Moroccan, the rest of the world doesn't always agree with it. And to move away from the strictly political territorial conversation, the best way to make it yours is to inhabit it. And the question is, how do you inhabit the uninhabitable? And they each gave amazing proposals, and Fernando's was definitely one of the most striking. And our proposal was to imagine how a city could work with a city below and a city above. How we could plan a city sectionally and not horizontally. What are the things you do at night? What are the things you do during the day? What are the relationship between the sleep, the work, the leisure, and the interconnectivity between neighborhoods in an area that can only live during the night and an area that can only live during the day? So it's kind of a Piranesian carceral fantasy, which led to this model. You can see Fernando's black ice cube there. And this notion of a city below and a city above that is both protected and open, and that is based on the relationship to the sand dune and the 30 degrees orientation of it, is a very quick proposition. But the notion is that it's not about plausibility, but there's a dimension in our work, even when it's politically loaded, because this is the necessity for critical endeavor and as strong position as possible. Thank you.
It's a good example about how you, with your global formation, you can understand just the local problems, no? And at the same time, I must invite to everybody to see your pavilion in the Arsenale. It's really wonderful. No, because it's our work there.
That too.
Yeah, this is true, but I think in this year, this one may be the more wonderful or one of the more wonderful. Thank you very much for the wonderful. Some people want. Yeah, yes.
It seems like your work tends.
Very good question, because there's actually a method to this madness. I guess the answer will be in 3 points and as clearly as possible. One, we traditionally start the project earlier and finish it later. A little bit in resonance to what Thomas was explaining this morning. We have a relationship to the places we work with, clients we work with, where we have a certain level of trust that we've built. So we're often asked to work on things where the site is not defined, don't know the project, don't know what the program exactly is. More often than not, it happened to me to tell client, you shouldn't do this project. It's not the right place to do it. Not many architects can do it because we're fortunate to have that approach, we have a lot of work, instead of the fact that the limitation of what an architect does in the contemporary world has shrunk, both in the vertical sense, production of a building, engineering, programming, process, in its liability is reduced, but also horizontally, the relationship between all the elements of value. We're not very old, and to answer tendency why we do so much work. It's because by looking at things slightly differently or laterally, we make our client a ton of money. I mean, it's true. It's not about that, but it is about. It's not just about money. It's about value. Value is jobs. It's feeding all the people who are working. It's being empathy with them, and it's being able to create things that are not as structured. So I guess that's the second part. Because we start earlier and finish later, we have the capacity to identify where value is. And value isn't always what they consider. It's not always in the drawing. Or architecture isn't always the drawing. Sometimes it's simply taking a decision to not do it. It's sometimes a way to look at it slightly different. Change the nature of the program. Change the keeping all of their concerns, but none of their concerns. And keeping it one thing, say, okay, the one thing you care is density. Everything else is fine. And you think you can make density with what it is. You're going to make more density with less work. So sometimes by just questioning assumptions. And that's what we do. We start the project by discussing amongst ourselves. Not what the project is, but where is the project? Where is the invention? Sometimes it's a formal invention. Sometimes it's a problematic one. Sometimes it's a relationship to the site. Sometimes it's decided that, okay, maybe this time we can harvest a lot of invention is then should be reduced to almost invention to miniature. You can work in a very big project, bringing it down to a single issue. That being said, if you do this, you still make architecture. It's not because bring it down to this that's all it's about. There's a centrality of things that you create after that. That's where the That's Frank here. The gist. Not a big fan of his work, but the problem with contemporary architecture was to tell you that the building that's there, that it kind of works, and that it's on budget, nothing else. So the question is, where is your project? What is the project? It cannot be that, okay, you enter here and here you have nice view, and then it doesn't work. The project has to be far richer. It has to have social and political implication and artistic endeavor, and you have to take a position. You have to be able to say things that people can say no to. If you only describe your project with things that people can only say yes to, that's good. That's good. You've got to be able to take. I'm going to say that all of some people don't, and some people can say it's wrong, but it's a position. Otherwise, it's just nothingness.
I'm curious, is Morocco also suffering like some neighborhood country with the problem of public space not used or very little used? And if I see you work a lot on public space, do sometimes you find that the public space you created afterward are not used or maybe not used as intended?
I worked in all of the neighboring countries. Morocco has a traditional public space and always has that. Now, do I ever have had the problem where the public space is not used? No. Is it all sometimes used not as intended? Yes. Thank God. Because you should not plan the public space. You should just offer it to the city and hope that it works. But if you start thinking that I'm doing this so people shop and rollerblade, people don't do what they're told, especially in Morocco. You know, there's an entire energy that's developed to go around the rules. Right? If we were putting that much energy to follow the rules, Morocco would be Switzerland. I mean, you drive a car in Morocco, you know they made those cars beep when you don't put your seatbelt. There's an entire economy of people who sell just a bit of the seatbelt and you plug it. So you don't have the noise, but you don't have the seatbelt. That's why don't you wear a seatbelt, right? That's also true. Yes. So that energy of going around the room, you have to play with it. You have to use it because it's there. So we don't have the problem of public space not being used because there's a tradition of it. We have sometimes the problem of the public space being planned in a secretive way, where the state has planned a lot of spaces in order to be able to control the population. Those spaces don't get to be used so much.
Yes, hello. In the project of the slaughterhouse, you said you raised a lot of money, you know, to stop it to be so. What exactly has been happening there that raised that money, you know, and what did you have to do to attract these people? You know, that's what I'm interested in.
Well, I can't say everything on stage, but that being said, okay, let's put it this way. You have an economy that's flourishing. Morocco is like Spain in '88. It's booming. So it got, in 15 years, it got incredibly wealthy, right? And this wealth is among a club of people. Everybody knows everybody. And they're all my clients. So I sometimes talk to them nicely and ask them, you know, it's a power play. I help them, they help me, and by helping me, they help themselves, right? So sometimes when I call, they know that I'm coming for something. You know, they're like, oh, I'm abroad, I'm in Spain, don't call me back. But we raise a lot of money because the money's there and it's looking for these things. We only create opportunities, and I'm not joking. People call us and say, okay, can we participate to X, Y, and Z projects? because they know it's not going to be stolen, and that we're honest. They know that it's going to be talked about, and that it's not that much money in the end for them. You know, you ask for a big real estate company to give you 100,000 euros. For him, that's what he puts in his gas for in his tank for 1 year. It's nothing. Then he can say, all the bad thing you think about me is not true. Look, I'm helping. And it's true. All of these people, they're not, most of them, they're good-willing. And they rather give money to private foundations than to the public state to do these things. And Morocco runs on this. I mean, Carlos will talk about it, I guess, more tomorrow, but the entire society of Morocco runs on NGOs because they're trusted to deliver the work. What's hard is not to raise the money; it's to raise the ideas. Right? Once you you can put the people in a room, and you can pitch the idea. They always give you money. After that, though, they demand that it works well, that it's beautiful, that it's awesome, that the TV is there. And, of course, they do. But I wish I could do this more. But there's a balance. You know, I can, or for example, we just, we raised a lot of money for the Venice Biennale. I know that I'm not going to call the same guy in 3 weeks, right? There's a balance of how we can do these things. And it goes two ways. After that, he's going to call me and ask for a huge favor because he knows I'm doing the master plan of the city of Marrakesh and that he's interested in XYZ. And that it's a two-way street. You've got to work with what you have. It's all honest, it's all transparent, but it's a matter of power play. Does it make sense? Nobody gives you money just because they want to. I hope I'm not making sound the job of an architect horrible. It's not, huh? It's really awesome, guys. It truly is. It's awesome. Actually, our work is divided 1/3 in Morocco, 1/3 in France, and 1/3 in the rest of the world. But today I focused mostly on Morocco. That being said, what we do in Morocco and in Northern Africa is incomparable to what we do in France. In France, I'm 35 years old. I'm a young architect. I do what young architects do: a small housing building, a small school, because you move in increments, right? Sometimes bigger project, but they stay smaller and much more, and they take longer, and they're honestly less exciting because what you do is it's a beauty contest. You're given the competition, the site is chosen, the program is written, the volumetric is defined. It becomes a beauty contest. So we don't put that much energy in that right now. And the strategy to live in Paris is because that's where my wife and kids are. It's simple as that. I like to be away. We were talking about this at lunch. I think as an architect, we have the necessity to project. That's what a project is. If you're in a situation, you cannot project. So in Morocco, I'm considered a French architect. And in France, I'm considered a Moroccan architect. And I like that because it's in this displacement that the invention is. It's easy for me to go to Morocco or to go to China and to enter the culture in a very superficial way and to take a position and to crystallize it in an object. And that doesn't mean that because I'm not Chinese, I'm wrong. On the contrary, if I have empathy and capacity to listen, and that I've developed through my professional ability the capacity to dialogue with the culture, then you can do it in Poland, you can do it in Morocco, and there is no necessity to be part of a culture to be relevant. That being said, I am much more comfortable in the Mediterranean environment. Okay, I like the sun, the food, the women. I'm a Mediterranean. I like to talk. Than in the Netherlands, for example, where I can't, or Scandinavia, where I have no desire to work there. I mean, maybe it will change, but right now it's a culture that doesn't excite me. You know, this cheese-eating blonde talk, it's just not for me. But it's me, you know. So it's not because I can't do it that I should. It's okay. I hope he's gonna change. You should change my mind. No, but it's nothing to say about those countries. It's about me. I'm just weak and limited. But no, I mean, there's a joke aside. I consider that engagement and empathy are the two main elements of what I do. I don't have that capacity to feel engaged and empathic everywhere. So I don't force it. I can't work on a thing where I just receive a script and they say, design this tower in Kuala Lumpur. If I don't go there and feel the things, I can't do it. That's not me. I know other people do it great, right? But I need to feel the grounds and the people and the food and the culture and the music, and sometimes something good comes out of it. All right. Well, thank you.